Well, hello, my name is Sese Bennet, and we're going to talk a little bit about cloud security and introduction to FedRAMP. So before I get into my talk, I just want to kind of get an idea of maybe some of the background of the audience. How many of you folks here are familiar with FedRAMP or have done business with FedRAMP? One person? Okay. A couple other guys may have heard of it. Heard of it before? Okay, good deal. How many people here have heard of cloud? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so we do have some folks that are familiar with cloud, and we're going to talk a little bit about cloud security, and we're going to sort of transition into to FedRAMP. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on cloud, because I'm sure that you've probably seen 5 more cloud presentations in your lifetime already than you probably want to ever admit. So, but we're going to talk a little bit about just to set the background, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about FedRAMP, what the FedRAMP program is, kind of how it works, and maybe how you can benefit from it if you're interested in FedRAMP. Okay. A couple of quick background things. Again, my name is Sese Bennet. I'm with LBMC Information Security and Risk Services. We are a security-based company based out of Nashville, the Brentwood area. So if you've ever been to Brentwood, you probably rode by in business to our offices there. So they were kind enough to ask us to come up and to present here in Louisville. So we're privileged to be here, and thank you for attending this presentation. We hope you get some good information out of it. So, what is cloud? This is kind of the generic explanation of cloud, but basically cloud is scalable, flexible IT services, and people are interested in cloud for a lot of different reasons. Some people are interested in cloud because they want to use technology that they can scale up very quickly and scale down very quickly based on their needs. And a lot of people take advantage of it because of the economies of scale. So you probably use cloud, if you use it in your business, you probably use it in your personal life. If you use Facebook, if you use Twitter, things like that, you use cloud. So we're going to talk a little bit about it and kind of how it really has a lot of benefits, but it also has some security risks that we have to be aware of as well. Okay. So this is the obligatory cloud overview slide. So let me talk a little bit about just this slide, because I want to give you an idea of kind of what we're going to be talking about when we talk about FedRAMP. When you think about cloud comes in a couple of different models, obviously. There's a public cloud, there's a private cloud, then there's kind of hybrid versions in between those two different types of cloud. Public cloud is the public stuff that you're used to seeing, like your Facebooks and things like that. Private cloud may be cloud that you deploy within your organization. So if inside of your organization, you're looking at being able to roll out something quickly, being able to store lots of data in a very cost-effective way, then cloud may be something that you may be interested in, or maybe something that you've looked at in the past. Okay? And then hybrid cloud is really kind of a version between the two. Being able to use it sometimes for public and sometimes for private, but being able to deploy cloud quickly to really realize those benefits of cloud. And you can see some of the pros down here at the bottom. Cut the bottom of the slide off, but cloud, some of the pros are it's on demand, it's scalable, it's elastic, so it can shrink and grow as it needs to. Low entry costs. It's fairly simple to go to the cloud. If you decide that you want to go out and go to the cloud, you can go to Microsoft or Google or Amazon. You can stand up services in about 10 minutes. It just depends on what you want to do. Now, obviously, that 10 minutes is not going to give you the time to look into the whole security aspects of it, to kind of do the planning that's associated with that you should do when you look at cloud, but it's very fast. You can do it very quickly, low entry cost. Choice and agility, there's tons of cloud providers out there. You guys know the big names and some of the choices that you have out there. And then the last one down there is disaster recovery. It's always a nice feeling to know that your data is being backed up, it's redundant, you have that ability to recover in case of a disaster. Okay, so let's talk about some of the types of cloud services. There's infrastructure as a service at the bottom, okay? Something that you migrate to or you build upon, or you migrate to and then you build upon it with platform as a service, and then software as a service. Okay? So when we talk about infrastructure as a service, we're talking about the basis of how the cloud is built. It's things like networking, security, business disaster recovery, business continuity, system management, things like that. It's really kind of the basis of how, it's really the same basis that you would build your regular network on, except it's in the cloud now. And when we talk about platform as a service, application development, decision support, web support, and things like streaming videos. Those are all platforms that you can build upon, and those are all platforms that we use a lot every day. The previous presentation, the gentleman was talking about his daughter in the Bahamas and streaming videos and everything. We use the cloud so much nowadays that we almost take it for granted. We don't even think about it. It's just something that we do, especially the younger generations. And then up the top, software as a service, something that we consume. Email, CRM, collaboration tools, ERP. If you use Salesforce, that would be an example of software as a service. So these are just the three kind of main areas that when we talk about cloud, then those are the three main areas that we talk about. Now, the interesting thing about these three areas is that on each of these three levels, there are security concerns, security considerations that you have to think about. There's obviously security around infrastructure. There's security around how you build out your applications. And of course, there's security around how you use and how you configure your application. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these and how they all fit into the whole overall FedRAMP picture. Cloud has a dark side too. Now, can anyone name all four characters? Anybody name all four? I'm not picking you, Andrew, because I know you know all four. Anybody? No? Okay, I'll give you guys some time to think about it. We'll come back to it. I know everybody knows that the person over there on the I guess would be the far right? Who's that one? Darth Vader, right? What's it?
Sese.
Yep. This was the one that usually gets everybody. Who's that? You got it. You got it. Very good. And of course, the last guy. He's the most recent one. You guys look at it? All right, somebody Google it. I know you guys will Google it. Somebody Google it and figure out who that is, and we'll get you a little prize or something. All right. So, did somebody say it? Yeah. Okay. He's got it. All right, you guys weren't Googling fast enough. All right. Okay. I'll get you something. All right. Cloud threats. So again, the cloud does have a dark side. So it's not, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There are dark sides to the cloud, and these are some of the just primary areas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these very briefly. And then we're going to get a little bit more into the how we can mitigate some of these things. So when we're looking at cloud, there's a lot of different types of security risks. Data loss in a blind environment. And if you were to talk about cloud 5 years ago, that was probably one of the main things that the security guys felt uncomfortable with. I'm taking data outside of my network, I'm putting it somewhere else, and I can't see what's happening to that data. I don't know. They could be doing anything with it. They could be securing it, or worse, they could be not securing it. They could be, everybody could have access to it. I can't see it, so I can't control it, so I'm not comfortable with it. So that was a big issue. That's becoming a little less of an issue, but it's still an issue. You put your data out there, how do you know your data is being secured? Commingling of data, shared technology vulnerabilities, denial of service attacks. If your information is on a cloud environment or on a cloud server, and that server gets taken down or gets somehow messed with from a security perspective, how does that impact you? How does that impact your organization? That's a big thing that you have to think about, right? So that's one of the things that is a security risk. And then there's a whole list of them. I'm not going to sit here and read the slides, but the other area that you have to talk about is compliance. How do you make sure that if you go to the cloud, that you're still going to maintain compliance inside of your organization? Compliance can cover a number of different things. Anyone in here subject to PCI? Is that your organization? Okay. People, credit cards. What about HIPAA? Okay, see some hands up now. Okay, all right. So if you're HIPAA, you're probably familiar with high tech as well. So, those are regulatory requirements that you have to think about. And right now, there's not any hard and fast guidance around HIPAA, around high tech as far as the cloud is concerned. But you guys that are in that healthcare field, you know that's coming. You know that's something that you have to think about. You know something you have to deal with. So we're going to talk today a little bit about how it's being handled from a federal government perspective. But my forecast, looking into my crystal ball, is that a lot of these same requirements that you see for the federal government side, especially around NIST, are going to be slowly being integrated into the healthcare side. Oh, the last one, legal contracts. That's a huge one. It's kind of one that's always overlooked. But when you're going to the cloud, a lot of people will do the technology, they'll make sure that it's secure, they'll make sure it has all the bells and whistles, but they don't think about how am I going to make sure that my contracts are favorable for me or favorable for my organization. So if something does happen in the cloud, how can I get my data back? How can I go and make sure that that the cloud service provider is keeping my data inside of the U.S., inside of the states, things like that. How do I handle e-discovery and legal hold issues? Those are all things that are huge. And those are the kind of issues that you don't really think about until they become a problem. And then when they become a problem, they become a big problem. So that's something that you have to think about, especially around cloud, is how do you handle the legal aspects of it? So I thought this was an interesting slide. It talks a little bit about cloud adoption. Okay. It says 85% of nearly 150 chief information security officers said their organizations are moving to the cloud, but nearly half expect a major cloud provider to experience a security breach. Does anyone else find that kind of odd other than me, maybe? 85% are going to move to the cloud, but they know they're going to be breached. It's interesting, right? That's not what security people like to see. We don't like, we know we're going to be breached. We like black and white. It's either going to secure or it's not secure. We like it one way or the other. But the reality of it, and you guys know this, is that as you move to the cloud, as you adopt new technologies, things are going to happen. Things are constantly changing, and especially when you're working in a cloud environment, because you don't have total control over that entire environment. So you have to make a best effort in order to secure it the best you can, and that's what we're going to talk about, how we can do to make that best effort. So how do you mitigate some of these security risks that this kind of study talked about? Well, there's sort of a 5-step model that I like to use. It's called the cloud mitigation model. The first thing that it talks about is defining the language. So understanding what you're talking about, and there's a whole presentation I have on this, and if you're interested in this slide, I can give you some more background detail on it. But the first one is define the language. So talk about, are you talking about software, are you talking about infrastructure, or are you talking about platform? And make sure that when you're talking and defining that language, the folks that you're talking to, your business folks, your technical folks, they're all talking the same language and on the same page. Because you'd be surprised if your CEO, your CIO, your CISO comes to you and say, we want to deploy this in the cloud because it's going to save us money. The marketing folks are on board and we're ready to go. And everybody kind of gets together and they start talking about cloud. So you're talking about the technical aspects of it. Your marketing people are talking about how they're going to roll it out in a marketing fashion. They want to roll out platform as a service because they don't care about software as a service. They don't care about the other aspects of it. Your networking guys are looking at infrastructure as a service, and before you know it, you got 3 projects that aren't even really talking to each other, right? So making sure that you understand the language and you're all talking on that same page is going to be extremely important. Design your requirements. Make sure you have your non-negotiable items in your requirements. That includes your contracts. Some things you can negotiate on. You may be able to negotiate on your service level agreements and SLAs, but some things you got to really say, we want it this way. It's got to be done this way, and we have to have it. So those are your non-negotiable items. Okay. Identify your tools. Look at your contracts. Look at your processes and audits. Look at your technologies. Look at your cloud service provider, and see whether they have things implemented like firewalls in the cloud. Do they have intrusion detection in the cloud? Do they have monitoring in the cloud? That's an important thing. Do they have incident response in the cloud? All those things that you do inside of your own 4 walls for your own network, you still have to make sure that they're all available in the cloud and you can utilize that in the cloud. Okay, develop a checklist. What are the things that you need to know up front? Go through that checklist and make sure you don't miss any of those items. That's going to be extremely important because the worst thing that you can do is get to the end of the process and understand, you got all the way through, you're ready to go, it's ready to be deployed, and you missed this major step because you thought someone else was doing it. So that's important. Make sure that you follow that checklist. And then finally, follow best practices. There's tons and tons of best practices out there that we all follow on a day-to-day basis. If you follow NIST, if you follow ISO, whatever your security program follows, then you want to make sure that you follow the best practices that are associated with that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some cloud security standards. Okay. And then we're going to get a little bit more into FedRAMP, and I said I will keep it brief with the other stuff. So, has anyone ever heard of the Cloud Security Alliance? Okay, a couple of folks. Have you guys used the Cloud Control Matrix before? Okay. Did you find it useful? Yeah, it's a good document. For those who may not have heard of it, the Cloud Security Alliance has a document called the CCM, and it's a document that was put together by the Cloud Security Alliance, and it's used to that kind of define security controls for various types of security standards. So it has a matrix that maps things like FedRAMP and PCI and SOX and you name it, some really obscure ones as well. And it's very good because if you're an organization, more than likely you have at least one security standard or compliance regulation that you have to adhere to. You probably have multiple ones. So this document is a way of being able to compare all of those so that when you deploy solutions inside of your environment, especially ones that are related to the cloud, you can see how it applies across the board. Okay, so it can save you a ton of time. It also can help you to build out a security strategy about how you want to attack those various compliance requirements inside of your organization. So I encourage you to go out and check it out. There's the URL to get to it. And again, it's called the Cloud Control Matrix. I think it's version 3.01 now, somewhere around there. Okay. All right, and FedRAMP. This is kind of the star of the day, what we're going to talk about here in just a second. So FedRAMP is a certification process, and we'll talk more about kind of where it came from and its history and everything, but if you want to go out and check it out, it's www.fedramp.gov. And if you follow any of the federal government laws and things like that, you'll see that FedRAMP is a program, even though it started back in 2010, it's a program that's still maturing. They're still fighting over a lot of stuff about how it should be done and who should do what and how it should, deadlines and requirements and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about it, but I encourage you to go out and take a look at the website and sign up for some of their newsletters and things like that, because I think you'll find it very interesting. Okay. All right, so what is FedRAMP? The Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program is what the acronym FedRAMP stands for. And as you guys know, the government is never short on acronyms. It's a U.S. government program created to standardize how the Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA, apply to cloud computing services. I forgot to ask, is anyone here subject to FISMA? Does anyone here have any FISMA? We have one person? Okay. So you know that FISMA, the FISMA and FedRAMP are very closely aligned. They're both based on the same set of NIST standards. And you can see that this whole FedRAMP program was developed in cooperation with NIST, with the Department of Defense, with GSA, and with the Department of Homeland Security. So it was a program that was put together to address a number of needs, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the key dates and what the program is built to do. Okay, so just a little bit of history on FedRAMP. December 9, 2010, the Cloud First policy was enacted. And basically what this policy said was that if you're looking to go and adopt new technology or implement new technology inside of your environment, you need to consider you're going to the cloud or using the cloud as your first option. Okay? And obviously there's some data payloads and things like that that can't go to the cloud. But in those cases, then there's other solutions that are out there and they will approve it. But for things that could go to the cloud, could possibly go to the cloud, cloud is going to be the first option that they would want you to look at. December the 8th, 2011, that's when the FedRAMP program was established. And then in June 2014, they required all federal agencies to meet FedRAMP requirements. So that's kind of just a really, thumbnail view of the FedRAMP program. The important thing to know about the program is that since June 2014, the program has really picked up a lot of steam. You'll see that organizations are going to the program or being kind of forced to go to the program as far as from the agency perspective, or at least utilize the program. The part that probably has more steam than anything else is that along with this requirement to move to FedRAMP came the requirement for cloud service providers or companies that are interested in doing business with the federal government to also adopt that same level of certification. So that's what we're going to talk about. If you're and I'll use the term CSP, if you're a CSP or cloud service provider, and you want to do business with the federal government, if it's GSA or whatever, HHS or any other federal agency, then you're probably thinking about, well, how do I get certified so that I can participate in this program? Because since they're forced to pick from this pool, I need to somehow figure out how I can certify my company so that I can participate in that pool. And that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, so here's the purpose of FedRAMP. Standardized methodology to security assessments, authorization, and continuous monitoring of cloud-based services. So they wanted to come up with a way to standardize the process. And as you know, security assessments, authorizations, continuous monitoring, If every agency did it differently and every organization did it differently, it would just be chaos. So what they said was, well, let's come up with a standard way of making sure that everybody does it the same so that we can do it once and we can reuse that same authorization or authority to operate multiple times. And that's really what that second bullet is. So once you define an organization, the organization goes through that compliance process and they get certified, then that certification can be used for other multiple agencies, or it can be used for all agencies depending upon which path you decide to go down. The nice thing also about it is that it provides a repository of authorized packages. So you'll see this term when you start looking at some of the FedRAMP documentation, authorized secure cloud packages. And basically what that means is it's an authority to operate, or it's a certification from the FedRAMP Program Management Office that says that you've gone through the entire audit process and your solution is secure and it is able to be used by any federal agency that participates in the FedRAMP program. Okay? So once you get that authority to operate, then you're kind of in that bucket. So when they want to use a service, whether it's an infrastructure as a service or maybe a platform as a service or software as a service, they pull from that bucket and they're able to utilize your service. So it gives you the ability to kind of have a heads up on your competition, because now you're authorized and you're in kind of a selected pool versus everyone else. It's kind of you're kind of a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a really big pond. Okay. All right, and then we've kind of talked about the next to the last one, and then standardized contract language. Kind of getting back to what we were talking about for contract language, there are some standards that you have to meet for FedRAMP that make sure that you have all of those required language parts in your contracts and in your agreements and things like that. So it's nice because now you kind of remove the ambiguity. You're not going to miss anything because it's part of the audit process. All right. So what does FedRAMP cover? It covers this whole list of things. I'm not going to read them to you guys, but you can look at them. But you can see that it pretty much covers most of the things that as security professionals that we're thinking about, right? It's going to cover like audit and testing. It's going to cover continuous monitoring. It's going to cover vulnerability management, so that includes all your pen testing and your vulnerability scanning and all those good things that we like to do. But it's also going to cover some of the things that we probably aren't really all that excited about. Data jurisdiction and ownership. It's also going to cover security of data at rest and in transit, so that includes all your types of encryption, all your FIPS encryption levels and things like that. It's going to cover privacy, confidentiality. It covers everything. It's a very comprehensive assessment, very comprehensive audit, and it's something that once you're done, you feel like you've been to an audit. But it's very comprehensive. Covers all these different areas. And I don't think I have this in the presentation, but when you go through these audits, there are about 325 audit steps that are associated with FedRAMP audit. So very comprehensive. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the players. I've been talking about the program, but I want to give you a little bit of information about who really is involved in the FedRAMP program. So there's really four main components, and I'll start with the middle one, cloud service providers. Cloud service providers, those are the clients that are interested in doing business with the federal government. Some people call them cloud service providers, people call them clients, some people call them organizations that are looking to sell services, whatever you want to say. Those are the guys that really drive the FedRAMP program for the most part. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is the FedRAMP PMO and the Joint Authorization Board. The PMO stands for the Program Management Office. That's an organization that's run by the FedRAMP group out of DC, and then the JAB, Joint Authorization Board, that's another group that's run out of the FedRAMP office, and they do really two different things. The FedRAMP PMO kind of organizes and runs the FedRAMP program, and then the FedRAMP JAB is a group of those organizations that I showed you on the first slide that came together and they authorized different packages. So once we get through an audit, then the audit results go through the JAB, and then the JAB is the final say on whether they feel that that audit package is sufficient and has all sufficient controls in place. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second as well. Down here at the bottom, the 3 PAOs. 3 PAOs are really the organizations that do the audits. Okay, they're the ones that conduct audits. 3 PAO stands for Third-Party Assessment Organizations. And then basically, they're the ones, they work with the cloud service providers to provide the audits. So they come in, they do the audits, and once they're done providing the audits, then the results from the audits are sent to the FedRAMP PMO and the FedRAMP JAB. Okay? And then the final one up here is the federal agencies. So the federal agencies are really they're the clients. They're the ones that the businesses are looking to do business with. Federal agencies have their role in the entire process is that they're the ones that go out and they work with the cloud service providers to look for services. So if you have a service, if you provide backup in the cloud, so the federal agency may say, you know, we need a company to come provide backup in the cloud. They look for a cloud service provider. The cloud service provider goes out, they find a 3PAO, they get their audits done, and then they submit it to the FedRAMP JAB and PMO. So that's kind of the flow. So it kind of works from federal agencies, cloud service providers, 3PAOs, and then the FedRAMP JAB. So it's really kind of a sort of an ecosystem of cooperation between these four components. And then once those four components are done, then the federal agency, of course, they can do business directly with that cloud service provider because they have an authorized package. Okay. Any questions on that one? That part? That's kind of confusing. Okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit more, just a minute, about FedRAMP Gap Assessments and FedRAMP Readiness Assessments and FedRAMP Audits. And if you look at it initially, you'd say, well, what's the difference between a gap assessment and a readiness assessment? Because they almost kind of mean the same thing. Well, in a typical audit world, a gap assessment is when you come in and you look at a client's environment and you determine whether there's gaps. You know, do they meet the requirements? Or there's something that they're just missing that you need to go out and you need to make sure that they put in place before you actually do the audit. And you would be right. But in this case, the FedRAMP Gap Assessment is really, it's more of an informal assessment that can be done by any organization. You can do a gap assessment internally yourself if you like. But it's one of those things that you can have that conducted yourself, or you can bring in your favorite audit company or your favorite technology company or your favorite partner, and they can do that gap assessment. But it's more of an informal process. Okay. Now, when you get down to the FedRAMP Readiness Assessment, that's more of a formalized process. That's actually part of the audit. This is kind of the precursor to number 3, the FedRAMP Audit. And I'm going to talk about all 3 of these in more detail, and I'm going to give you some information and some background on this that may help you if you're looking at going down this path. Okay, so the FedRAMP Gap Assessment, the initial step in determining where gaps may exist inside of your environment. So it's the first thing that you would want to do. If you're interested in FedRAMP, do a gap assessment, because with 325 controls, you don't want to go through that twice. You probably want to do it once and get it done and over with. So do a gap assessment, understand where your vulnerabilities are before you actually start going down an audit path. The gap assessment evaluates documentation, processes, procedures, and technology. It's also a consulting engagement. So it's separate from the readiness assessment. It's not something that's part of the readiness assessment. It's not something that gets sent in with the audit results. It's something that you do completely separate. So if your organization is 95% there, then you probably have a very short gap assessment. If your organization is 10% there, then you have 90% of work to go do, but no one's going to know about that 90% of work except you in your organization. So when you go and you remediate those gaps. Okay. We talked about it does not have to be performed by a 3PAO. If a 3PAO performs the gap assessment, then they can't do the readiness assessment or the audit. Okay, so that's important. So a lot of times you'll have favorite relationships with an organization or 3PAO, but they can't. They have to bring in someone else to actually do the readiness assessment, because if they don't, then it becomes an independence issue, it's a conflict of interest that the FedRAMP PMO does not allow. Okay, and of course, there's no time frame associated with your gap assessment. You can do it. It can be as short or as long as you like, or you can do it whenever you like. Okay. So let's compare. Oops. Got to slide out of order. Oops, sorry. Hang on. Let me go back. There we go. Okay. The FedRAMP Readiness Assessment. So let's talk a little bit about the readiness assessment. So the readiness assessment is a formalized process that's used to go out and look at your environment once you get done your gap assessment, if you decide to do one. But it's really part of your audit. So it's kind of a precursor to your audit. So if you're interested in going down to do the full audit, then you have to do this first. And basically what this is, it's a process of going in and looking at your environment and determining whether you have the capabilities in place versus the documentation. Okay. So what that means is that early on in the FedRAMP program, in this history, many organizations were submitting their packages for review, but the organizations had all their documentation done. I mean, the documentation was stellar, but they had nothing implemented. They had no two-factor implemented. They didn't have security controls implemented. Half of them didn't even have policies and procedures implemented around passwords. So the FedRAMP PMO looked at this and they said, you know what, we're not going to spend our time evaluating all these and going back and forth with these companies anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to have this readiness assessment process that front ends the audit. So what this does is basically it forces the cloud service provider to create a document that's done by the 3PAO that basically says that we have all the capabilities in place. You know, we have the ability to do two-factor authentication. We have the ability to do encryption. We have the ability to do backup disaster recovery, things like that, and it goes down the entire list. And that's something that's done early on in the process. So the FedRAMP PMO and the JAB, they look at this document and they determine whether you're ready to proceed through the rest of the FedRAMP process. Because, and if you think about it, it really is a benefit to the CSPs, the cloud service providers, because you don't want to start this process and get all the way through it to the end and find out that you don't pass. You know, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of time, and it's probably an impact from a business perspective. So when you get through this process, which takes about 4 weeks, you'll know whether you're to a point where you're going to likely go through the rest of the FedRAMP audit process successfully. And that's what this is meant to do. It's really kind of meant to be a gauge to the three CSPs, but also kind of an indicator to the rest of the FedRAMP PMO that you're likely to get through the rest of this process successfully. One of the benefits of this FedRAMP readiness assessment is that once you're done this and you pass the readiness assessment portion, your company name is put up on the FedRAMP Rep's website as being FedRAMP ready. Okay, so that basically means that you can go out and you can start using the logo, you can start selling with it, you can start saying that we're likely to complete the FedRAMP process, and then it kind of takes you back to what this slide, you remember the slide we looked at that showed the agencies. Then you can start having those conversations with the agencies that says, now we're getting to the point where we're getting close. Let's start talking about deployments and contracts and things like that. So it gives you kind of that ability to let everybody know that you're going down that path and you're likely to be successful with that process. Okay. And then the next one is audit, the FedRAMP audit. Okay, so this is kind of the the big enchilada. This is the work part. Talked about 325 controls, so it covers all 325 controls. It's based on NIST 853 standards. You're probably familiar with those. Must be performed by a 3PO. Okay, and as we mentioned, it can be the same 3PO that performs the readiness assessment, but it can't be the same organization that performs the gap assessment. Okay, that's really important. 3POs work with CSPs to develop key auditing components. And this is something that's probably going to be a little different from the audits that you're used to going through. In this case, the 3PO actually sits down with the cloud service provider and they develop the test plan together. Okay, so it's not that we would walk in the door and we say, okay, this is our test plan. We drop it on the table and we say, go start giving us evidence and artifacts and let's start, looking over people's shoulders and so forth and so on. In this case, you actually have to develop it together. And then once it's done, you have to submit it to the FedRAMP PMO for review, and then you start testing after that's done. So they give you a set of guidelines to work within, but really you have to develop it together, and it has to be something that's applicable to the environment. Okay. The next bullet, 3POs work with CSPs to complete annual recertification requirements, including continuous monitoring. If you haven't heard this term before, continuous monitoring for FedRAMP is really a process of looking at things like vulnerability scans, looking at your logs that come off your security devices, monitoring your environment on a continuous basis, year after year, month after month, day after day. So, and that's something that it's tested initially, but it's also tested on an annual basis, along with likely 1/3 of the controls that the FedRAMP PMO designates as critical controls that need to be reviewed. Okay. One of the things I wanted to mention about the previous slide, the readiness assessment. Readiness assessments should take about a month to complete. So it's a fairly short exercise. The audit should take about 90 days to complete, but about 6 months to get through the entire process. Okay, that's what they're saying. So I'm kind of skeptical in the 6-month part, but I'm gonna be positive and hope that we start getting some through in about 6 months. But it's a long process that you have to go through, but 6 months is around the time frame that they're estimating. Okay, so these are some of the documents that you would have to provide as part of FedRAMP. You guys are probably familiar with a bunch of these. Information security policies, I mean, you all have policies and procedures. Contingency plans, incident response plans, system security plan. If you've never heard of a system security plan, I encourage you to go out to the FedRAMP website and download the template. If you're interested in FedRAMP, that will probably be your first step that I would recommend. Because if you don't like documentation, then you may want to go do something else. It's a very long document, but it'll give you an idea of some of the areas that will be involved, obviously involved in the audit, but it also give you an idea of the document that you'll have to create. System security plans range anywhere in the range of, I think the template is about 400 pages long with no information in it. So once you put some data in it, you're looking at a pretty hefty document. So go out and take a look at the system security plan. E-authentication template talks about how your types of data, kind of data classification at the government level. FIPS 199, controlled information summary. These are all templates that are provided by the FedRAMP PMO, and they all deal with helping you to sort of put your data in kind of buckets and define how your data is laid out in your environment, and then define where your controls, how your controls are laid out in your environment. And you would put them in these templates, and you provide that as part of your audit results when you provide your audit data to your auditor. Okay. All right. So, paths to certification. There are two different paths for organizations that are interested in certification. One is agency sponsorship, and the other one is the Joint Authorization Board, the JAB that we mentioned earlier. So let's talk about agency sponsorship, and then we'll talk about JAB, and I'll kind of draw a distinction between the two. Agency sponsorship requires a 3PO audit, but it doesn't require the readiness assessment. It's not an absolute requirement. It's highly recommended, but you don't have to do it if you go down the agency path. Okay. FedRAMP certification applies only to the agency that is the sponsor. So if the Department of Homeland Security decides that they want to sponsor a company and they go down the agency path, then when that company gets their certification, it only applies to the Department of Homeland Security. It doesn't apply to any other agency in the U.S. government. Okay? And that's going to be a difference from that, between that and the JAB. Additional agencies can review previously submitted FedRAMP documentation. So if another agency like HHS decides that they want to use that same tool that DHS is using, they can go out and they can pull that cloud service provider's package and review it, and they can approve it themselves and decide that they want to use it, but they still have to go down their own approval process. It's an individual approval process for each organization if you're looking at it from the FedRAMP agency or from the agency sponsorship level. CSPs work directly with the agency, so this can be a faster path to certification. What that means is that instead of working through the JAB and going through kind of the whole gamut of everything that you have to review, if you're working with an agency and the agency decides that they don't want to, they're not interested in a certain security level or a certain security component, they can say, you know what, it doesn't apply to our agency, we don't care about it, like PIP cards, we don't care about PIP cards. If you don't have PIP cards, then that may be an issue for another agency, but it's not an issue for us. We're going to go ahead and move forward with you, or we're going to conditionally approve it based on the fact that you have PIP cards, or you will have PIP cards later on in the future. So the agency, in this case, has a lot of latitude to decide what they want to accept as far as risk for their agency. That's basically what it comes down to. So if you're going down this path and you have an agency, then you'll probably work very closely with an agency to define what your security requirements are going to be. And again, they can, and if an agency is working with you, they can move you through that process a lot faster because they're going to be the ones that are going to be reviewing your packages initially, and then they'll make the recommendation to send it to the JAB for any additional review going forward. So this can be a much faster path to certification, but the downside is that it only applies to the agency that's your sponsor. All right. Okay, so let's compare that to the JAB, or the Joint Authorization Board path. The JAB path requires the readiness assessment report and the 3PO audit both to be completed. So there's no shortcuts as far as the readiness assessment. You have to do it if you're interested in the JAB. One of the reasons why you have to do both of them, obviously, is that the FedRAMP certification applies to all federal agencies. So once you're done the certification through the JAB, your company can do business with any federal agency that participates in the FedRAMP program, period. Okay. No restrictions as to agencies or anything like that. It's out there. If they decide they want to use it, then they have authorization to use it. Once a FedRAMP certification package is submitted, the FedRAMP PMO makes a determination if the submitted package qualifies for certification evaluation. Okay, so this is a gotcha for the FedRAMP or for the Joint Authorization Board. If you're a company and you want to do business and you go through this path, you say, I'm going to go down a JAB path, I want every agency to be able to use my tool or my widget, you have to make sure that you have at least a decent level of interest at the federal government level or the agency level, so that when those agencies go back and they talk to the FedRAMP certification or the FedRAMP PMO, even if they're not looking to sponsor you, there has to be that level of interest, because the FedRAMP PMO, they have the ability to say, you know, you have a fantastic tool, but we only have 3 agencies that are interested in it, or only have 1 agency that's interested in it. So we're not going to waste our time going through and certifying your tool because you don't have enough agencies that are interested. And they can say, we're just going to put you in a queue, and we'll look at you in 6 months, we'll look at you in a year, we'll look at you never. Okay, so that's something that you have to think about. So that's not really a federal agency thing. That's kind of more of your company thing. You know, you're working with your business development folks to make sure that you have that level of interest developed, so that when you go and you submit your package to the FedRAMP, to the JAB, the JAB knows that their interest is out there. Agencies may, you know, you may have a relationship with an agency, and the agency may go with you and say, okay, you know, we have 4 agencies within our agencies that are interested in these, you know, in your package, and let's talk about how we can get these guys through the process without them being your sponsor. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Because that's an important thing that that's one of the things that they're looking at, trying to fix that, so that organizations don't start this process, get halfway through it, and find out that they don't have enough interest to be able to really complete the rest of the evaluation by the JAB. Because, you know, you can imagine if you spent $150,000 for the audit, you know, you spent $300,000 implementing technology, you get all the way down to the last part, you submit everything, and the FedRAMP JAB looks at it and goes, you know, yeah, it's nice, but nobody's interested in doing it, so we have limited staff, we're not going to look at it. Then that's probably not going to go over very well within your organization. So they're looking at trying to figure out ways to be able to fix that, so that everything that's submitted can be evaluated. But right now, it is a queue. They have a queue, kind of an informal queue, and if you don't qualify, then you know that you know, you're not going to get evaluated. Okay. CSPs work directly, the last bullet, with the FedRAMP PMO and Joint Authorization Board to achieve certification. So you work directly with the PMO, you don't work with an agency, and that's what you need to do for certification. Okay. Any questions on that one? All right. So key takeaway points. Cloud is here to stay. It presents some unique challenges, but it's a technology that we've kind of grown accustomed to. We know that it's going to be something that's not going to go away. It's something that we use every day. Traditional security models that we're typically used to implementing inside of our own 4 walls really don't cover all of the security requirements around cloud. It's different. Cloud is a different environment. We just have to adjust ourselves to be able to do that. And we have to adopt security best practices in order to make that happen. Security best practices that are specific to cloud security. For organizations that are interested in expanding their market to the federal government, FedRAMP is a program that you should be looking at right now. Okay? That may change in the future, but right now it's the best option out there for repeatable processes. It's what federal agencies are looking at. It's the mandate that they have, and it's what really kind of provides that standards around language, approach, tools, checklists, and best practices. So even if you're not looking to go to the cloud right now, as far as from the FedRAMP perspective, I still encourage you to go out and look at the NIST 853 standards, look at the FedRAMP requirements, because it only can help your organization if you're doing any kind of business in the cloud. Okay. All right. My report comes to the conclusion that cloud technology is of no use to this company. I'll upload it to Dropbox so you can take a look at it. That's one of my favorite slides. But yeah, it's everybody uses it. We all kind of deny it, and people say that, you know, it has no benefit. But we all have our lives in the cloud, whether you want to admit it or not. Any questions? No? Okay. All right. And here's my contact information. If you do have any questions, feel free to give me a call. Or you can search me on Twitter or Google. You'll find we have a bunch of information out there about cloud and cloud security. But thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And if you guys, again, have any questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you. And I think you got like 3 minutes to go mill around, or 4 minutes to go.